Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. We are listening to An Unexpected Killer.
April 2011. A teenage boy is reported missing in Marion County, Florida.
We get a call about a missing child. Sonia Jackson was reporting her son was missing.
An investigation launches and a brutal crime involving multiple people is exposed.
We were told that they had had several fist fights between each other because of their disagreements or disputes.
Police close in on a number of suspects. The motive is clear.
It was just this mass ball of jealousy and revenge.
This is the tragic story of Seth Jackson. The gruesome details of his murder and how an extensive forensic investigation brings his murderers to justice.
I just question how he can do that.
April 11th, 2011. A distraught mother, Sonia Jackson, reports her son missing.
I respond to the address. We get the story, when's the last time you seen your son, when's the last time you heard from your son. She told us that it was the previous evening. She was having text conversations with him, and then all of a sudden there was no communication whatsoever. She got concerned.
Initially, when Seth was reported missing, we simply assumed he was a runaway. No time did we feel there was foul play or any reason to be overly concerned.
But just a few hours later, that is all to change.
Sometime throughout the evening, somebody anonymously called her and said her son had been shot.
With her son missing and reports of a shooting, Mother Sonia Jackson desperately looks to the people her son Seth was last in contact with. One name comes up: ex-girlfriend Amber Wright.
Miss Jackson informed us that she had spoken to Amber Wright and that Amber told a story about meeting up with Seth Jackson on the night he went missing.
There was texts from Seth to his mother telling her exactly where he was going and that Amber had texted him and that he was going to meet her.
Police tracked down ex-girlfriend Amber and another friend who was present that night, Charlie Ely.
We spoke with Amber and Charlie, and they told us that the last time they seen Seth was down the street, quarter mile away at a Bellevue Hills subdivision, which is another mobile home park down the road from where she lived. And that the last time they'd seen him, that he was talking with his mom. He got mad at his mom and took off. And the last they'd seen of him was at that intersection. And as they was walking down the road, they heard fireworks go off.
For law enforcement, the incident is unusual for a relatively crime-free area.
Back in 2011, Summerfield was a quiet area. It's mostly farmland. The Villages is a retirement community that kind of keeps creeping closer and closer. But all in all, Summerfield has always been just a quiet farm type area.
I don't think that you would consider it a lot per capita for what we had, but we had murders and we had drug problems in this town.
The sheriff's office opens an investigation and starts looking into Seth's background.
Seth was a teenager that grew up in the neighborhood. He'd lived there pretty much the whole time, had a lot of friends in that neighborhood. There was Charlie Ely, Justin Soto, Kyle Hooper, Amber Wright.
His brother said he was very loving, very caring. And the pictures around the house that I saw of him, he was goofing with his brothers, just a typical, fun-loving 15-year-old.
Seth had started seeing Amber Wright in 2011. His parents weren't happy about the relationship.
Seth Jackson and Amber Wright had dated back and forth. They had broken up a few times and then they would get back together. But ultimately, people would describe their relationship as pretty volatile.
When they would fight, they slung mud at each other. And it wasn't just pick it up and sling mud. It was with backhoes. they slung mud at each other. They had a lot of horrible things to say about each other. I don't know that even a quarter of it was true. But at that age, when all your friends think that, it becomes your truth.
During one of the many breakups between Seth Jackson and Amber Wright, they would taunt each other on social media. They would send each other nasty messages. They would call each other names. They would basically just try to insult each other for anyone on social media to see.
After one of the breakups, Amber found a new man.
After Seth Jackson and Amber Wright broke up, at some point Amber Wright started dating Michael Bargo. And this created a bit of friction between Michael Bargo and Seth Jackson.
The tension between Bargo and Seth gradually became more intense.
Michael and Seth had a disagreement over Amber, so this is kind of a jealousy thing between Michael Bargo and Seth Jackson.
We were told that they had had several fist fights between each other because of their disagreements or disputes. And we were also told that Seth Jackson was usually the one who won those fist fights. We were also told by Seth Jackson's mother that Michael Bargo had threatened Seth numerous times. He would make comments that, I have a bullet for you, or I'll burn your house down. And it was also well known throughout the neighborhood that Michael Bargo typically carried a gun with him.
Local mother Tracy Wright calls the sheriff's office with critical witness information that is to move the investigation along.
When Miss Wright called in, she informed law enforcement that her son indicated that he actually saw Seth Jackson being murdered.
It was definitely a phone call that I wasn't expecting to have. So immediately I contacted my sergeant at the time, told him that she had advised me, and then he told me to go straight to the house. I asked her on the phone if he was still there. She said, yeah, he's on the front porch.
When you have the report of a missing juvenile, and in conjunction with that, someone else saying that they saw the juvenile being murdered, it was no laughing matter. We knew we had to immediately act to find out where the truth was.
17-year-old local Kyle Hooper has been called into Marion County Sheriff's Office after having reportedly witnessed the murder of missing high school student Seth Jackson 2 days before on April 17th.
Kyle was a juvenile himself, and you could tell he was nervous, but you could also tell he was disturbed by what he had saw.
A lot of it was Kyle's mannerisms. When I first interviewed him, I brought him into the interview room and his mother came in with him, which is perfectly fine. But during the interview, Kyle, I think it was more his body language than it was exactly what he was saying that made me wonder that something was missing. He was not telling me everything.
Charlie, you and Mike all live in the same
And
house.
Rose, yeah, there's another. I don't know what you're going to call her.
Justin Soto, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you all live at you guys all live together in one house.
Yes, and
Okay.
Amber was staying, staying there, but a little bit.
But Kyle was very specific about what he had seen.
Kyle talked about seeing Seth Jackson attacked by Michael Bargo and being shot.
And I hit him over the head with the stick.
Who'd you hit?
Seth.
Okay.
And he was in the chair, and I got in the kitchen. I said, now get out the house. And then all of a sudden I hear, bam, bam, bam. Mike sitting there laying bullets into him.
But initially, Kyle did not indicate that he was part of the plan or part of the attack.
And about that time, his mother got a phone call, and she went to step out of the room, and I asked her, can I continue to talk to him? She said, absolutely, and she walked out. That's when Kyle and I started talking about what really happened.
After some questioning, Kyle ultimately indicated that not only was he involved in the attack on Seth Jackson, but that his sister Amber and friends Charlie and Justin were also involved, and it was all orchestrated by Michael Bargo.
Did you see Michael Bargo shoot Seth?
The bombshell was when Kyle confessed. We found out that all of them were involved at that point.
Kyle gives a reason for his involvement.
He indicated that he participated in this attack on Seth Jackson because he had been made aware of a couple of incidents where Seth Jackson had maybe struck his sister, and that's why he felt like he was justified in participating in this attack.
Seth had not only been shot, his body had also disappeared. Detectives now start to press Kyle Hooper on where they could find the body.
When asked where the remains were, I think Kyle said he didn't know, but Michael Bargo had said something about a quarry, and it was over by the sporting goods store, and that was how we got to that.
Detectives start to bring in the group of friends named by Kyle Hooper for questioning. Charlie Ely is next to be interviewed.
She said she was aware that Amber had attempted to lure Seth to the house and even talked about how they went and met him at a street corner. But ultimately, when Seth came to the house and the attack began, she said that she and Amber went into a bedroom and closed the door and then just stayed there the entire night and didn't have any clue what had happened to Seth Jackson.
Amber and Seth were talking, and Kyle comes out of nowhere and hits him, and me and Amber dart to my room.
Where did he get it?
Over the head.
And what happened? Did he fall to the ground?
He looked dead. Like, I didn't really see anything. I mean, he kind of looked like woozy, because, like, I looked back, and while me and Amber were running to my room. And Kyle said, "Get the out." And he went out that way, and we hear Mike's door hit something, and Mike came out, and we heard gunshots.
For that type of activity to go on in the house among friends, and for her to say she just shut the door and stayed there all night and went to sleep, we didn't believe that. We felt like she was more involved than what she was saying.
Charlie also has a story for what happened the next morning.
She said the next morning they woke up and went into the house and they could smell bleach, and they knew something had happened, but didn't know exactly what.
Is that when you guys got up to start looking around?
Like, we didn't really look around a lot because we didn't really want to be in the house.
Okay, but what did you notice about the house?
It, like, I just, like, it looked, like, cleaner than what it was.
Charlie Ely also talked about how she had been threatened by Michael Bargo, and that Michael Bargo threatened that if you say anything or tell anything, I'll kill you too.
Mike came out, we heard gunshots, and Mike, like, he ran into my room, and he told me and Amber to shut up. If we said anything to anyone, he would kill us.
So this is after the gunshots?
Yeah.
He came back into the house?
Yeah, with the gun, and he was waving it around.
What kind of gun was it?
It was a revolver.
Okay.
I mean, he's letting us, like, touch it, so our fingerprints are on it.
And obviously seeing what he had done to Seth Jackson, I'm sure there was a little bit of truth to that statement. But again, I feel like she was minimizing her own involvement and what role she played.
Investigators locate Michael Bargo, who demands an attorney be present. They continue to interview the other suspects in the case. Ex-girlfriend Amber Wright is next.
The first initial interview, there was a lot of untruthfulness. But when they finally confronted her with what her brother had said, she finally confessed.
Amber, Michael Bargo, Charlie Ely, and Kyle, they had all got together and decided that they were going to lure Seth to Charlie Ely's house, but at one point it was just to beat him up. And she talked about how he came into the house and Kyle hit him, Michael Bargo hit him, and the two girls ran to the bedroom and shut the door, and they heard some gunshots, but they didn't know anything. They didn't come out of the room until in the morning.
Kyle hit him first. Kyle hit him first? How many times did Kyle hit him? I was running out. He only hit him once or twice. I didn't look at it. I was in the kitchen. And all I seen was Seth fly, and then Kyle Roach flew, and Mike flew right behind him. They grabbed him, and they fell down the stairs, and then all I heard was the gun go off.
You didn't hear any gunshots while they were in the house?
Yeah, the gun was, like, I'm sorry, I left that part out. There was, like, 1, 2, 3 gunshots in the living room. And they finally got outside after they fell down the stairs. And Charlie was like, come in the room, come in the room, come in the room. I walked in the room with her. I was so shaken up. I'm staring at her. I'm crying. She's trying to hold me to stop crying. I'm about to puke from it all. And then they got him in the house and laid him on the floor.
she never really came off the fact that she wasn't in the bedroom with Charlie Ely while this was going on. But once you got to the scene, there wasn't a door on the bedroom. She had to have seen what was going on. And everybody else that was interviewed agreed that Charlie Ely and Amber took an active role in getting him there and helping clean up afterwards.
Did you participate in cleaning up? Anything was breached? The door.
You scrubbed the door? What door?
The screen door that's like on the inside of the regular house door.
Okay. What were you thinking about doing Seth up there?
I don't know, I wasn't thinking at the time.
Did you just hate Seth that bad?
I didn't see it. I was hurt.
Why were you hurt? What happened?
Because every time he hit me, he told me he gave me an STD. And I got tested, but it came up negative. Then I kept checking my name. I lost all my friends to him. Everybody that I was so close with didn't talk to me anymore.
So that's why you agreed to do this, because you were mad at him? I'm just asking, between me and you, is that why? Was that your reasoning behind it? Was just you were mad at him? You didn't have any reason?
Michael Bargo is the next to be interviewed.
When Michael Bargo was taken into custody and brought to the sheriff's office, we saw that he had some cuts and scratches and some injuries to his face and to his hand, but he chose not to talk about those injuries or tell us anything about the incident. When you see Michael Bargo, he's a very small person. He's short. He was very skinny. He's just a small individual. He's not intimidating, but the way he looks at himself, he thinks very highly of himself, and somehow had enough influence on the rest of these people to convince them to alter Seth Jackson's life.
Next to be interviewed from the group of suspects is 20-year-old Justin Soto, the person the others refer to as Roach.
Justin Soto also denied any involvement from the beginning, but after hearing the versions from the other people involved and sharing with him that the other people have told the whole story and also implicated him, it finally caused him to also understand that the truth was out, that there was no need in trying to hide it any further.
Why did you lie to me the first time?
Because I just don't want to get in no more. I didn't even want to get in this. I just wanted just to get my life together. I was planning on going to the military and everything, but I didn't picture that.
Justin Soto talked about how after Seth was killed, he went and looked for wood so that they could create a bonfire.
Like, and Carl put them in like this blue thing in the end.
What's a blue thing?
I don't know, it's like a bag or something.
Okay.
He took them out to the fire.
Statements from the suspects are starting to suggest they burned Seth Jackson's body in an attempt to hide the evidence.
We actually spoke to neighbors who lived in the area who talked about the bonfire and the size of this bonfire and said it was a huge fire that burned for hours and hours.
Should have never moved in the house.
Seth Jackson was lured to Charlie Ely's house where Kyle Hooper and Michael Bargo were in wait. Justin Soto was also at that house, planning to kill him.
It was told to us that it was Michael Bargo's idea to take out Seth Jackson's teeth so that he would never be identified. And it was also told us that it was Michael Bargo's decision to try to break his kneecaps so that he could fit him into this duffel bag, so that as the duffel bag was brought outside and thrown into the fire, no one would associate that or believe that, they were doing that to a human.
I just need to know, did you guys put the body into the burn pit?
Well, I grabbed him and helped him put it in. But then I walked back into the house and he did what he did. I told him what I
did you do to burn the body?
Everyone sort of pointed the finger at Michael Bargo as the reason why Seth Jackson's body was treated the way it was after he was killed.
After the burning of Seth's body, the group then had to find a way to dispose of the remains.
There were 5-gallon buckets of paint. When we got there, you could see where the paint had been poured out, but there were no buckets. What happened was they scooped what they could out of the fire pit, and they put it in these paint buckets. Then Michael Bargo went to take these paint buckets to the other side of Ocala to drop them off into a quarry.
At this stage, detectives have enough evidence and organize arrest warrants.
That day, we ended up moving them from the operations center here at Central over to the county jail where they were placed under arrest for murder.
Investigators have made significant progress. Now they need to build a case. On April 19th, with 5 teenagers in custody for the gruesome murder of Seth Jackson, Marion County detectives and forensic technicians descend on the first crime scene, the house where 15-year-old Seth had supposedly been beaten and shot multiple times.
Near the end of the day, we had the search warrant approved by a judge, so myself and several members of our forensics team went to the house just to see how extensive this search is going to be.
The home was very small. It was a 2-bedroom mobile home, and it was in deplorable condition. It was dirty inside, clothing, shoes strewn about everywhere.
Looking at the property, you would have never known something this atrocious had happened just 1 or 2 nights prior.
I took evidence from the front porch area, which was one of the areas that had not been processed at that point, where there was potential shoe print evidence on the concrete patio, possible blood evidence, a pressure washer, and some other things like that.
We saw shell casings laying on the ground. We saw bullets. We saw the bathtub. We saw the shed. We saw paint buckets. We saw the fire and the fire pit. There was also a dumpster beside the house. So we knew it was going to take an extensive search to get all of the evidence that we needed to collect.
The forensics team needs to use some specialized processes to recover their samples.
When we search for blood that maybe has been cleaned up in a scene, it's sprayed. It's a liquid form, and we spray it. We use luminol on the front porch or the concrete pad, and I think we had some areas that luminesced there. And we started in the main bathroom. We sprayed the floor, and there were some areas that would luminesce. So we would stop at that point, mark them with a pointer, and then take photographs. It wasn't a bloody scene, or what I would call a bloody scene, just small areas. Around the back of the home, there were 2 areas where there had been fires. One was just an area that I think maybe had used longer ago. The other area was an actual fire pit that had pieces of concrete around the outside of the pit, and it had debris in the pit. And that was where I believe they disposed of the body.
Once the remains of Seth Jackson was loaded into these paint buckets, they had to drive them to this quarry. And once they parked in a field, they had to actually carry these buckets through some wooded areas to get to the pond and the quarry.
The team now needs to find the spot.
We arrived in what would be a back area, which is the way that I was told the suspects traveled. As we began to walk the area, we saw shoe impressions and then circles in the sand. And the circles resembled that of what would be a 5-gallon bucket. And we were previously told that Seth Jackson's remains were burned and put in those 5-gallon buckets. So those things began to add up with the information that was provided, and we documented those things
We walked total of about a mile and a quarter until we reached the Lime Rock Quarry, and there we saw a 5-gallon bucket floating in the water.
We were told that the buckets had been weighted down with lead and thrown over the edge, but we also found evidence that some of those buckets hit the side of the quarry and actually dumped some of the remains out as it fell to the bottom of the pond. We had divers actually go into the pond and recover some of these buckets.
When the buckets are opened, the detectives' worst suspicions are confirmed.
The first bucket that was looked in, the lid was still remained on the bucket, and it was removed, and inside you could see the ash and charred debris,
which still contained some of the original remains of Seth Jackson.
Despite their professionalism, the find impacts on the team.
The dive team, it was devastating to them. I was speaking with the diving coordinator, the guy in charge, and it was pretty tough on them.
Believing all the evidence has been collected from the lime pit, the forensic team focuses its attention on the fire pit.
Based on the information that was provided, the burn pits were of interest, and the dumpster itself.
We had a professor from the University of Florida from the CA Pound lab come to the scene and actually sift through the fire pit. And Dr. Warren was able to find very small bones. And in looking at these bones, he surmised that the bones came from a young male. And Dr. Warren found numerous bones that had been left there and had not ultimately been thrown into the Lime Rock pit. As I watched Dr. Warren recover these small fragments of bone from this fire pit and confirm that these are human bones, it really brought reality to this crime. Up till now, I had just heard stories, and up till now, I had just listening to the people say what happened. But now seeing exactly what they described, knowing it was true, and knowing that Seth Jackson's body was in this fire, and ultimately he's not coming back, it just brings everything to reality. And ultimately, I've never been one to become extremely emotional in cases. When I look at people or evidence, I just see it as evidence. Can this help me prove that a crime was committed, and can this help me prove that a certain individual committed this crime? But as I watch these bones being pulled out of this fire pit, I have to, as a parent, just understand the heartbreak that's going on in the Jacksons' lives right now.
The next stage is forensic analysis.
Once the remains from the fire pit and the Lime Rock Quarry had all been collected, they were all sent to the University of Florida, where they make every attempt they can to reconfigure Seth's body and determine if there's injuries and exactly how he possibly died.
Well, there was a lot of ash, but when it was sent to the lab, there were remains of a body. Small bits of a body, but there was enough there to identify it.
They would also utilize these bones to test for DNA to ensure that this is truly Seth Jackson's body. Ultimately, his death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner's office, based on the story we had received from each of the kids, and then also the findings of the lab at the University of Florida.
Prime suspect and ringleader, 18-year-old Michael Bargo, reportedly leads the group on how to dispose of Seth's body.
I think Michael Bargo just watches too much TV. He decides that if anybody does find the remains, they won't know who it is because he'll pull the teeth out so there's no dental records, and maybe he's just sadistic.
These people thought they could get away with something, but they didn't. They thought they were disposing of a body, but they didn't.
All the defendants are formally charged, and investigators have to share the heartbreaking news with Seth's mother that her missing son's remains have been formally identified.
I went to the house. When I got there, I had called her and told her I had some news and I needed to come talk to her. She called family members And there was a lot of family there when I got there, and they said, she really believes that you're going to bring Seth home. That's what she thought. So I knew then that this was going to be really tough. So I went in the house and we sat down at the table, her and I and her husband, and I had to tell her that we had found Seth's remains, that Seth was no longer with us. I just kept her looking at me in my eyes. She latched onto my eyes, and you could see it in her face. She didn't want to believe anything I was saying. I did not tell her the whole story of how it happened. I told her at that time that we needed to find a psychologist, and I would talk to the psychologist, and we would talk to her together, and we would do it in steps. I don't think she could have taken it.
I remember looking in Mr. Jackson's eyes, and he understood what I was trying to say. But as I talked to Miss Jackson, she just still wanted to believe that he was just simply missing, or he had gone off with some friends.
With 5 young defendants awaiting trial, prosecutors need to understand the motive. Why? What motivated such an evil crime?
I think it was jealousy and revenge. Amber wanted revenge on him. They had broken up, got back together, broken up, got back together. They had terrible things to say to each other, to all their friends. And I think that she wanted revenge on him, and in walks Michael Bargo, the knight in shining armor that will take care of it for her.
The jealousy which had developed between Michael Bargo and Seth, with Amber in the middle, appears to have been the catalyst.
At the time, I think that the jealousy that she had between Bargo and Seth, she was like bouncing between the two of them. So I think that's where this stemmed from. She manipulated everybody that she was around.
And this manipulation had worsened the situation between Seth and Bargo.
I think there was some jealousy. I think there was some hatred. I think there's some fear on Michael Bargo's part that at some point Amber Wright might leave him to go back to be with Seth Jackson.
He was probably told stories from Amber about stuff that may or may not have happened between her and Seth.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, this was his way to ensure that Amber would never leave him, at least not for Seth Jackson.
In autumn 2011, the Marion County State Attorney's Office begins the trials of the 5 teenage defendants accused of beating, shooting, and killing 15-year-old Seth Jackson in April of that year. Charlie Ely and Justin Soto were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
During the court process, Charlie Ely would talk to her family, and they would laugh and joke about where they were going to go out to dinner as soon as she was found not guilty. She was completely convinced that she did nothing wrong and that she was going to walk away free.
Do you think what you did was right or wrong?
I know it's wrong.
So you know what you did was wrong, right?
Yeah.
Well, at least I'm getting that from you. We know the difference between right and wrong.
I just want to die.
I don't want you to. You have a baby to live for, okay?
Yeah, but how am I going to live for it if I'm in jail?
It's a bridge we have to cross over when we get there.
When I testify at trials, I see the defendant sitting at the table, and I'll see how they're dressed, and they're always dressed well, and they're always trying to present well. But unfortunately, that's not always a true depiction of what they looked like or how they acted when they were choosing to commit this crime. But as I testify, I focus more on the jury. It's my job to tell the story. It's my job to be open and honest. And so I focus on them, and as I answer questions, I just try to tell them the story. I don't focus very much on whoever's sitting at the defendant's table.
But those defendants continue to tell more about what happened to Seth.
Was he dead when you guys put him in the fire?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Because Mike shot him again.
Because he was still alive?
Yeah.
So he took at least 4 bullets. He was still alive.
So my child one more time in the bathtub because he was still alive.
There was no doubt in my mind that they were all involved and all should be found guilty. Oftentimes, defense attorneys are good at what they do, they're crafty. Oftentimes, jurors can be distracted by details that really aren't significant. So I understand that sometimes guilty people are found not guilty. But in my mind, I knew they were all involved. I knew they should all be found guilty. And I trusted that the juries would listen.
Amber Wright and her brother Kyle Hooper are tried together in 2012. They too are both found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Watching Amber Wright's attitude and demeanor during this entire investigation and all the way through the court process, it was sad. There appeared to be not a single bit of remorse, not a single bit of care for a person that young to be involved in something so gruesome. Either she was hiding her feelings or she's just a heartless individual.
Kyle has changed a lot from the time he was arrested till he went off to prison because he was at the county jail, and I would see him regularly. I hate to say this, but I almost felt bad for him because he was the only one that was remorseful. And I think that it hit him before it hit everybody else, consequences of what happened. But it was too late. There was nothing he could do at that point.
Knowing that Amber could one day be released from prison, I'm kind of torn. When I saw her go through this process and go through the trial, I felt like there was no remorse. So that side of me feels like she should spend the rest of her life in prison.
Facing death, Michael Bargo's trial finally takes place in 2013.
Without a doubt, Michael Bargo was the person who drove this crime. He drove this premeditation and this plan. And without a doubt, he is the one responsible for all of them having committed this crime and gone to prison.
I've been in court. When Bargo's been in court, he's very, he's smirky. He thinks he's a star. He really acted through his trial like he was the star of the show. Very cocky.
Michael Bargo was placed on death row, and because of the crime and its atrocity and heinousness, he's still there on death row. But ultimately, in the state of Florida, it seems like people stay on death row for a long time.
Over time, and given the very young age of some of the offenders, the sentences are appealed. Charlie Ely's conviction is overturned, and she is released in 2020 after serving 9 years in prison.
I feel like Charlie Ely was rightfully convicted of murder. Her defense made an appeal that her counsel had not been effective enough, and ultimately won that appeal. And different things have changed in the case. Witnesses change. Witnesses sometimes die. And so I understand the state attorney's office decision to not take her to trial again. But ultimately, she's still been found guilty. She's still spent a considerable amount of time in prison. So I feel like she should still be in prison, but I understand the decision and I respect the decision.
We do our job to the best of our ability, and we leave it in the hands of the court system. And if the court system lets them out, sometimes it's hard on us, but we can't get involved in that because, we've done our job and then we let them do their job.
When you look at it from the standpoint that Seth Jackson will never come home, it definitely gives credibility to the argument that Amber Wright should never come home.
With the trials finally over and offenders sentenced, the Jackson family can finally start grieving.
There were nights Sonia was so upset, and she would just call me and say, I just don't think I'm going to make it. And we would get a cup of coffee, and we would sit on the phone till whatever it took, till she was feeling better and knew that she was going to be strong enough to do this.
I think when it comes to law enforcement, there has to be closure because the next case is coming and the next case after that. When it comes to Seth Jackson's family, at some point, I hope they find peace and I hope they find forgiveness, and then maybe they can have some closure. But I'm not in their shoes, so I don't know if they'll ever have that.
The murder will stay with the community and investigators, shocked that such hatred and violence can stem from jealousy.
This is a case that you'll never forget for your entire life. This was probably hopefully the most heinous crime scene that I've ever been involved in. I hope to never have to do that again. But yeah, I'll remember this one for the rest of my life.
I think there was heartbroken and horrified that this could happen down this little road in a little community where there's a lot of kids. There's a lot of 15-year-olds that live in that area. And I think that they were all shocked.
I think the thing that stood out to me most, the thing that I will always remember, is how these juveniles had committed this crime. They were brought in to the sheriff's office, and they talked about how soon they could get going, they needed to get home, or they wanted to go home and watch TV. Like, I guess they just block it out. I don't know how else they would deal with it.
I don't question anything about this case. This was a case of jealousy and hate, and I believe a ringleader convinced some influential people to join him in getting rid of his competition, and unfortunately they joined him and became part of this plan, and most of them are still paying for that still today.
I just question how people can do that, but it goes on everywhere.
We all realize that we speak for the dead. We speak for the victims. If we don't do our job, the victims don't get justice, the families don't get closure. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps sometimes and realize that it's not all about you. You've got a job to do and you need to go do it.
For the Jackson family, it has to be heartbreaking each time you think of your son and think about how he died. I hope one day they find peace. I hope they find it in their heart to forgive. But I also understand this is their child. That day might not ever happen.